Hey, welcome back to the show, guys. After so many requests, I've eventually got around to trying to capture Megadeth's Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good guitar tone using the Marshall DSL, a few stomps and basic gear. So let's see how we go. So just to start with, this was a really hard tone to try and capture. It's just that a super old school metal tone. It's half clean, it's half dirty. It's really nasty actually. And those sorts of tones are always the hardest to try and get. It's not just a really aggressive Marshall sound. It's a blues-based tone that has substance, and it was recorded really cheap back in the day, and sometimes those things are the hardest to try and capture again. You're trying to make it sound like an old tape recorder and a low budget and whatever else they didn't have in the studio, but it's a really interesting tone, really fun to play around with, and surprisingly the Marshall DSL does well. So So the gear that I'm using today starts with my Jackson Mark Morton signature, the Dominion guitar. It's Japanese made. It's got Seymour Duncan SH6 pickups in it, the distortion set. And to me, it's the most similar guitar to what Dave used on that album. He had his BC Rich Mockingbird, I think. And a stylish looking guitar. And to me, this one sort of fits the ballpark for that. Then we get to the Marshall here, the Marshall DSL20H. And the settings for this, it's sort of a crazy EQ to dial in, because we're not really just using the head, and if you try and just dial the head in for this yourselves, it'll probably sound terrible. It's got to work with the microphone in the cab, but we'll get to that later. But for the reverb, it's just moderate reverb, and the resonance of bass is quite low, but the presence is up full, and that gives you that really sort of an aggressive top end. But if you move the microphone away from the speaker later on, you lose the high end from that high presence, but it's just like a clicky background. The mids are up full, and that's self-explanatory. It's Dave Mustaine. I'd hate to be in the front row of those concerts back in the day. Like, I'm sure that guitar amp of his just would have ripped your head off. And the gain of the amp's wound down a little bit, as you'd expect, and I've just wound up the volume just a little bit to compensate so it doesn't sound thin, but all in all, it's not too loud. So looking down at the pedal board now, I've got the Boss NS2 noise suppressor in the front end and effects loop using the 4-cable method in that diagram there. I've got that in every video. That's just a staple in my videos. The next, in the front end of the amp, we've got the Boss SD1 Super Overdrive. And with this one, I find it just tightens things up if I have the drive right down and the level and the tone just sort of moderate. And that, it doesn't add any gain to the signal. It just tends to really just sharpen the tone in the front there. So then in the effects loop, I've got the Master Effects EQ from Hell, and this really is where I'm getting most of the tone today, like the Marshall and the EQ from Hell. I'll just play, you'll hear it straight away. If I turn this off, back on. And then beside the Para EQ, I've got the MXR 10 band, and I'm not trying to counter the Para EQ or do anything funny with the 10 band. All I'm really doing with that is just using it as a high and low pass filter and just getting rid of those lows and getting rid of the highs off the top end, just on the output there, and just to make it sound just like a record, I guess, like a classic record. And that's a really good way that I've found to do it. You just get rid of the highs and lows on each end. We did it with Kill 'Em All. I think it's just the way that it is. It's just the way those guitars were recorded back in the day. They don't want an entire bandwidth of guitar. They just want like a mid-focus section. And then it gets to the capturing of the recording. And for this, I'm using an SM57 microphone, just a single SM57. I've got it in front of my Recto 112 with a V30 in it. And that's in the corner there, and you can see it's got the soundproofing over the top. And we'll just go into that a little bit. All right, so the easiest way to explain it is just to show you all. This is just a cover that I've made. You can see it's just full of foam, different wadding, it's different densities of foam. It's just a 3/4 inch plywood box that's quite sturdy, and the more foam the better, but you do run out of room with it. So I'll just put that there. So when I started this, I'll just video it as I go. I actually set it up so the microphone's an inch back from the grill, and just off to the side there you can see. So that's originally how I set it up. I've done the recording and I've pulled the cover back. The microphone had actually fallen into the cabinet like so. So it wasn't actually where I had it placed anyway. So to me that sounded fine just then, but the microphone had fallen off and fell into the grill. But most of the time if I'm recording for high-end guitars, I've usually just got it just off to the center there, usually under the E for the engineering on the Mezza badge there. And that's how it usually is, just about everything. But there's a few tones that we've done over this course of these series, and I tend to, especially if you've got the presence really high on the amp, if you've got high presence and high treble, and sometimes you need that for the tone just to sound like it, like that live sort of especially Dave Mustaine's tone. He had such a mid-focused, trebly sort of aggressive tone that no soundproofing would ever stop his tone. So to mic that up and sound half decent on a record, I suppose, you've got to, the further you move it away from the center of the speaker cone itself, the less fizz you're going to get from that speaker. It's going to sound warmer, but it gets darker as well. You got to find that happy medium, of course. But I find if you move, I would say 50% across the speaker from the center of the cone, and then you just move back just slightly, an inch or so, it gives that little bit more air. It gives it a little bit more like a darker tone. But if we were trying to capture Dave's tone right in the center there, it would just sound terrible. So it's a fairly tight fit as you'd want, but we'll just see how that sounds. So for the last few days, that microphone's been sitting against the grill and I didn't notice, but the tone, your ear just tends to adapt after time, but I do like it better now that I've moved it that little bit away and given it the space, a bit more air in there. But really it didn't make a whole lot of difference. It's more of the placement coming across the cone of anything. But look, it's a really fun tone to do and it's a great album. So I guess that's a really fun tone to try and recreate, that 70s, 80s sort of a really old school metal tone, rock tone. And using your microphone placement and basic things, you can really come up with some classic tones there. So for any of you that didn't know, The Killing Is My Business was actually remastered back in 2018 called The Final Kill. It's different artwork. It looks a lot better, and it sounds really good. It's super clean sounding. You can hear, I heard guitar parts that I never even knew existed, and everything about it, it's just balanced now and sounds really good and is up to speed with Peace Cells and later albums. So give it a listen, you might really like it. And until then guys, hope you enjoyed this week, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.